Well, the search for jobs is said to be the leading factor driving people to join fast-growing violent extremist groups in Sub-Saharan Africa. That's the latest find by the United Nations. The report carried out in 8 African countries showed that extremism is growing in the Sub-Saharan Africa despite a decline in worldwide deaths from terrorism. Charm Gono looks at what is spreading the extremists' networks of influence.
Sub-Saharan Africa has become the new global epicenter of violent extremists, with almost half of global terrorism deaths in 2021. That is according to a new report by the United Nations, which shows the Sahel region as the most affected. The militant groups such as Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda and ISIL have taken over large swaths of territory, killed thousands and displaced millions across the region. So how are these groups succeeding in penetrating nation-states? According to interviews carried out in 8 countries, 25% of interviewees cited job opportunities as their primary reason for joining. 22% said they wanted to join because of their family and friends, while 17% linked it to religious ideas. Education levels among recruits were also found to be low and mistrust in government high. More than 1,000 of the interviewees were former fighters.
The geopolitical dimension should not surprise anyone. It is a part of precisely this phenomenon when states are essentially no longer able to provide the rule of law and to provide national security, then the opportunity for other actors to become part of this drama grows exponentially. We have seen it in Mali, we've seen it in Libya, we've seen it in the Horn of Africa.
There's fear that these factors could reverse the gains made in the fight against extremists. Governments and partners are urged to move away from security-driven responses to development-based approaches to counter violent extremism. Prioritizing child welfare, education, rehabilitation, and community-based reintegration services are also other countermeasures. Chamwono, CGTN.
Well, let's now go in depth into this story. CGTN's Mohamed Kahia is joining us from Mogadishu with more, and Ajek Mangut is joining us from Abuja. Mohamed, let me start off with you because in Eastern and Horn of Africa regions, Somalia has lately borne the brunt of extremist attacks. Now, this new report by the UNDP suggests that many people are joining extremism for jobs and because they are angry over arrest of family and friends by government security agents. To what extent does this ring true, though, in Somalia?
Well, Beatrice, some of the factors mentioned in the UNDP report, such as forceful recruitment, lack of injustice at the corridors of courts, and also some family issues, and also unemployment opportunities. Unemployment are some of the key factors here in Somalia that are leading to recruitment, especially armed groups operating here in Somalia, such as Al-Shabaab and also Islamic State. Well, we have seen this and documented by the Somali security agencies in the ongoing operations against Al-Shabaab, which is now going into its 8th month. Some of the prisoners of war captured by the Somalia's armed forces from the Al-Shabaab have said that they have been forced recruited by the armed group Al-Shabaab. Some of them said that they were seeking better opportunities like economic reasons, so to speak, and also issues of injustice like many people here in Somalia still go to seek justice from Al-Shabaab courts, which they see it as very very viable, and those are some of the reasons that are still still here in Somalia that many people, especially young people, leading to joining armed group Al-Shabaab. And as I've said, we have seen this in the ongoing military operations across the country, especially in Middle Shabelle region and also in the Hiran region. And some of these people who have been recaptured, captured by the Somalia's military, who have mentioned these reasons for joining, they are taken to some rehabilitation centers before they are allowed to join their families.
Ajak, let me come to you though, because what about Nigeria and the Niger regions? What's the feeling there about the driving force behind young people joining extremist groups?
Well, Beatrice, for Africa's most populous country, like the report said, one of the driving forces is unemployment rates, which is about 33%, the high rate of poverty, inflation rates, and of course, illiteracy. Nigeria is among the top 3 countries with the highest number of out-of-school children. About 20 million children are out of school. And so these children are sort of vulnerable targets for recruitment into some of these extremist groups that we've seen, like Boko Haram, not just operating in the northeast of the country, but we've seen activities of armed groups known as bandits in the northwestern parts of the country. Also, we've seen more than half of the over 200 million population living in multi-dimensional poverty. And so security experts, economic experts have said that these are some of the driving forces that are leading people to join some of these groups, because people live in extreme poverty and they can barely afford 1 meal a day. And so if they have an opportunity to eat more than what they are able to afford, this is it's something that appeals to them to join some of these groups.
All right, let me now rope in David Otto-Endele. He's an international defense and security analyst. He's joining us via Zoom from Abuja. David is also the director on security at the Horn of Africa Institute for Peace and Security. David, what's your take on the UNDP report's conclusion that security-driven counter-terrorism responses are, and I quote, often costly and minimally effective?
I mean, I do understand why the United Nations Development Program would say that. But, you know, that's not all of the story. In effect, you know, every counter-terrorism or anti-terrorism strategy that is done in isolation will turn out to be often costly and, of course, ineffective. And, you know, the UNDP refers particularly to strategies which are driven by security agencies alone. And I do agree with that. But, you know, when you look at the triangle of terror, or what I call the Otto's triangle, and this is where you have to determine how what I call the life cycle of terrorism, how it occurs, you would quickly find out that, you know, there is at the top of that triangle motivational factors. That's the reasons why people join. Mm-hmm. And there you have to apply what we call preventive measures. Then, of course, you have, you know, how people are recruited, how they get their arms, and how they get financed. That is where law enforcement comes in, and up to the process where, you know, you talk about, you know, preparing and preventing terrorists from launching attacks, you know, on targets, you know, and getting them to acquire the opportunity. So when you look at the entire triangle, you quickly find out that, you know, there is no one strategy that can be done in isolation. The answer is often to look at all the 3 areas of the triangle and then deal with a comprehensive strategy. So even if the UNDP talks about dealing with livelihoods alone or dealing with the motivational factors, that's just an early intervention preventive measure. But it doesn't mean that, you know, the law enforcement and security agencies do not have a place, you know, when it comes to counter-terrorism and anti-terrorism strategies.
All right. So, Ajak, let me come back to you here, because, you know, the situation in in Nigeria and the wider Sahel region is very complex, especially due to the allegiances, you know, to different extremist groups and other military action. What other actions are regional leaders pursuing to prevent recruitment of youth in such groups?
Well, Beatrice, leaders in the region are being encouraged to tackle the root causes of violent extremism in the region. Security experts have said that governments in the region need to invest in quality education to ensure that the millions of children who are out of school are being educated so that they are off the streets, and also to reduce the rate of poverty, reduce inflation rates in the economies, and also create job opportunities for many young people who are part of some of these groups that we've seen. And when they have gainful employment and they're able to make a decent living, some of these groups will not be appealing to them to join. But until these things are tackled in line with the military action, there's not much that would be military action will be able to do. So the military action and some of these root causes of violent extremism needs to be tackled.
Well, David, and very briefly though, what practical options do you see for both communities and governments in Sub-Saharan Africa to prevent young people from being lured into joining extremist groups?
Yes, that's a very good question. And terrorism is driven mostly, what I call a people-centric activity, which means there has to be a comprehensive understanding and cooperation between the people who live within these local areas, the governments and the security agencies. There has to be that coordination and collaboration. And I talk about sensitization, which means, the local population has to be sensitized, but also they have to have some level of trust, to be able to understand that they can be protected by security agencies. We talk about providing alternative pathways, and this actually prevents, as the UNDP says, it prevents young people from considering, joining these terrorist organizations, as we've seen in research in other areas in the Sub-Saharan Africa. But most importantly, I have to point out, I think it's, the issue of identification and addressing underlying factors, that lead these young people to join beyond the search for employment. Because what we've discovered, as you may know, is that a very few amount of young people do choose to join these groups. And, perhaps one of the things that, we keep promoting is why do many people, refuse to join? Why few people choose to join? So I think it's very critical to deal with those developmental issues and to also focus on the fact that, and accept the fact that despite the, the consequences of what happens, as a matter of terrorist activities, still yet very few people, choose to join this group compared to the ones that choose not to join.
All right, David, Otto Endele, Ajek Mangut, and Mohamed Kahiye, to you all, thank you.